Hi everybody, I'm glad to be with you again this week. I'm going to talk today about policing issues in Toronto, both to talk about the negotiations that are going on about the police budget right now, also to talk about an upcoming forum that's sponsored by a group that I'm involved with called the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition. And I also just want to remember and talk about unnecessary deaths that are occurring much too frequently in Toronto after people have interactions with the police. I'm referring specifically to Sylvia Klippengatis, who's pictured here, a woman who was shot in the chest by the Toronto police on Friday, October 7th. And it sounds like Ms. Klippengatis was in the middle of a mental health crisis and experiencing a lot of anxiety and upset. And the police were called to intervene because she was quite out of control, it sounds like. I mean, we only have the information provided by the police. But in any case, no matter how upset and distraught she was or how irrational her behavior might have been, there are people who deal with people in mental health crises all the time who don't have the option of shooting them in the chest, and therefore they figure out other ways to deal with people, to help them calm, to de-escalate the situation, perhaps to back off and give the person space and room until they tire themselves out. All sorts of methods that people who work in the mental health field, people also who work with people in crisis generally, and also the loved ones of people who are going through these crises, all of us that deal with people in mental health crises figure out ways to calm people, to work with them, to de-escalate situations, as I say, that don't end up in those people dying. It's only unfortunately increasingly when people in these states, and even in some cases when people have mental health issues but are not actually in crisis or being irrational at any particular time, too often these incidents are ending up with people dying. In fact, in Toronto, in the last 3 months, we've had 3 deaths. One in August was Charlie McGilvery, a man who had mental health challenges because of brain injury that he suffered when he was very young, a man who was not responsive, and I guess a person who, if you talked with him, didn't really show much emotion or response on his face, but nevertheless was a very kind man, a very helpful man in his building, did favors for people all the time. Charlie was out for a walk with his mom in August, early August this year, and after an interaction with police that was not provoked by Mr. McGilvery, as far as we know, but involved police coming up and questioning him on the sidewalk based on information. Again, we got to shrug our shoulders. We don't know. When these things happen, they disappear into the SIU investigation. Nobody talks about them. But in any case, what happened in early August was Mr. McGilvery had a brief interaction with police, and witnesses say he was tackled and thrown to the sidewalk, and shortly after that he died. On October 7th, Ms. Klippengatis was in a crisis, as I was saying, and the police arrived, and shortly after they arrived, she was shot in the chest and killed. In September, there was an incident in the Regent Park area that we have almost no information about, where a man was reportedly died again after an interaction with police, although we have very few details on what happened there. And also in September, a man who was, the complaint had been laid of domestic violence. He apparently was verbally or physically abusing a partner or someone that he lived with. He was escaped to his balcony and did not want to surrender to police. And there was a very infamous video shot of him being tasered by the police from the balcony above. And that man was knocked over his balcony and ended up on the ground and has some severe injuries. And I'm not sure what's happened out of that. But suffice to say, way too often, people who are either distraught, having a mental health crisis, or are non-responsive to the police because of brain injury, perhaps they've been, or they're deaf, or they're someone who faces certain kinds of mental disabilities, people are ending up dead after interactions with the police. We had an inquest long ago into the death of Edmund Yu, a man who was also shot to death by police on a Spadina bus after threatening them with a small hammer. And in that case, an inquest came up with many, many recommendations about police training, what needed to happen, what needed to change about the response to people with mental health problems. It seems like after many, many years of continuing problems, continuing deaths, that the police are not paying attention to those recommendations and are not learning from those recommendations. And we need to be concerned about that. We need to hold our police accountable to the recommendations that are made. They need to work with people who have mental health issues. They need to work with them in ways that does not allow them to use their weapons, frankly. They need to learn how to work with people in mental health crisis without resorting to a taser or a gun or a baton or their fists. They need to learn how to de-escalate. They need to learn how to bring in other people who know how to handle these situations, that can work with people and talk with them to calm them down. They need to learn how to back off and not enter these situations screaming and yelling at people to obey them. It is fruitless and ridiculous to be screaming at someone to obey you when they are not rational, when they are not paying attention to anyone. So why the police continue to use this method of dealing with people who are distraught is ridiculous and proving to be lethal. In talking about this, it's really important for us to talk about what can be done, and there are solutions out there. And I want to invite you, if you're concerned about these issues, to come to a public forum on October 18th that is being sponsored by the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition. That forum's taking place at Innis College. That's 2 Sussex Avenue. That's on the University of Toronto grounds, just south of Bloor, off of St. George, at the corner of St. George and Sussex. We're going to be talking about these policing issues, as well as the police budget, as well as how police deal with youth, and police culture in general. So we're going to be talking about those issues, and we really want you to attend and be part of coming up with solutions. We had a forum back in June. We outlined many different issues and many different possible actions that we can take to change these situations, to change the way policing is done in Toronto. This forum on October 18th builds on that, and we want to invite you to bring your ideas, to bring your intelligence, to bring your care for the fellow residents of Toronto, so that we can work together and try to figure out how we can make sure these kinds of things don't happen again. It's a wheelchair accessible space. We have Dr. Scott Wortley from the University of Toronto going to come and speak to us about his research into policing practices, racial profiling, and other issues that he's done a lot of research and work on. And then we're going to have a really fruitful discussion. So I hope you'll join us there October 18th, Innis College, 2 Sussex Avenue at 7 p.m. And also, just pertinent to all of this, there are discussions going on right now about the police budget. As you know, and we've been talking about the cuts that are being proposed by the Ford administration at City Hall. Part of what they've done is asked every department in Toronto to cut 10%. So that's the TTC, Parks and Recreation, libraries, and the police are being asked to cut 10%. The police, as they usually do, are digging in their heels and refusing to make these cuts. Specifically, the chief, Bill Blair, is scaremongering and refusing to make these cuts. He's warning that hundreds of officers will have to be laid off, and that this will cause the streets of Toronto to become more unsafe, etc., etc. Now, this flies in the face of research, which shows that the numbers of police officers in a city makes no difference whatsoever on the crime rate. The crime rate in Canada across the country, and particularly in Toronto, has been falling for decades. We're now at the levels of about the 1970s. And this has had nothing to do with ups or downs in the police personnel. What this has to do with is demographics. It has to do with how many young men there are in our population, because they tend to be the people who get into the most trouble legally. It has to do with social programs and the amount of support that families who are marginalized get. It has to do with the culture that we have here in the West of consumerism and entitlement, and the notion that we all have the right to anything that we want, without understanding that that this building of desire and want in our population leads to social unrest because of the growing gap between rich and poor. Most of the people in our society can't have what they want. It's also a function of racism, immigration bashing, a function of all of these things as people start to blame each other and start to and look for culprits and look for people to blame for the difficult situations that they're in. So there are lots of reasons why the crime rate is going down. There are lots of reasons why crime occurs, but for the chief to say that somehow removing some officers from the street is going to affect that is disingenuous on his part. The police board is meeting again this Thursday, October 13th, and they've given the chief a week to come up with a budget that supposedly cuts 10%. I was at the meeting last week and found out that in fact the police are not being asked to cut 10% from last year's budget the way everybody else is. They've already been allowed to add on money to millions of dollars to the baseline that was supposed to be their cut target. So that baseline is now up to a level of $886 million is what the chief is supposed to come up with a budget for. That represents a 4.7% decrease from last year. So already the police are being given leeway that other departments are not being given, and still the chief is digging in his heels. The police board has given him 2 years to come up with these cuts instead of the 1 year that everybody else is being asked to do. So once again, we're seeing the police let off the hook. This in the face of continued deaths, and like I say, we're at the rate of 1 a month right at the moment, and this is totally unacceptable. The police are being given leeway to continue to escape the cuts that everybody else is being asked to make, and it's just totally unacceptable, folks. So I encourage you, if you can, to attend the police board meeting on Thursday. It's at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or 1:30, sorry, in the afternoon at the police headquarters at 40 College. And I again encourage you to come out to the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition Forum on October 18th, 7 p.m. at Innis College at U of T. Hope to see you there. You can find it on Facebook under events, Toronto Police Accountability Coalition. The event is called We Can Create Better Policing for Toronto. And we can. We just have to work together to do it. Thanks.